Welcome to this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, the Farmers Weekly Question Time event in association with Savills at the 2026 Oxford Farming Conference on the 7th of January 2026. We hope you enjoy the listen. Ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year and a warm welcome to our Farmers Weekly Question Time event here at the 2026 Oxford Farming Conference. I'm your host, Johan Tasker. Celebrating its 90th anniversary, the Oxford Farming Conference is a key event in the farming calendar and marks the start of the agricultural year, in policy terms at least. I'd like to thank the conference directors for hosting us here today and to our sponsors, Savills, for making this question time possible. And with that in mind, our panel of 5 experts who'll be answering your questions this afternoon. On my immediate left, Tom Bradshaw, President of the National Farmers Union, who farms in partnership with his wife Emily and parents in North Essex. I'm going to introduce Emma White. Now, Emma is from the Felix Project, which is London's food redistribution charity, which rescues high-quality surplus food and redistributes it to those in need. On my immediate right, Henry Tufnell, Labour MP for Mid and South Pembrokeshire. Henry comes from a farming family and was a practising barrister before becoming an MP. Next to Henry, Kelly Hewson-Fisher, Director of Rural Research at Savills. And last but by no means least, next to Kelly, is Peter Craven, Head of Agriculture at Natural England. From a Lincolnshire farming family, Peter is a Nuffield scholar and studied agribusiness management at Y College. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give our panel a big Oxford welcome. Now, we've got various people earmarked to ask questions in the audience. I'd like this to be a two-way thing. I always think that these events are as much about the audience as they are about the panel. So we're going to ask a few questions, and when I call your name, if you could wait for the microphone and then ask your question, please. And the first question, Sarah Calcott.
Sarah Calcott, Partners in Produce. Panel, good afternoon. What is your verdict on the Batters report, and what should the priorities be in terms of the delivery of its findings? Thank you, Sarah.
Tom, I'm going to ask this one of you to begin with. What's your verdict on the Batters review? This is the farming profitability review by Baroness Minette Batters. And what should the priorities be in terms of delivering its findings?
I mean, there's obviously some 57 recommendations, some really critical elements contained within it that, taken collectively, can have a big impact. I think the danger here is that if they are picked out piecemeal and half a dozen are delivered, rather than looking at how we strategically try to look at the majority of the recommendations within the review, then we will only make incremental change. And so I think we all knew there was no silver bullet, and I think that's what the number of recommendations obviously suggests, that there are many different areas that need looking at to drive the substantive change which is needed in the long term. I think the food board that is being set up and going to be chaired by Emma Reynolds, and vice chair is going to be Angela Eagle. I think that is making sure that the meaningful outcomes come from that board are going to be absolutely vital. Right the way across policy, we see legislated targets for everything but food production. And when we look at, we've got the food strategy which is being developed. I think it's an important area of work, but it's becoming very health orientated rather than thinking about the role of primary production. And I think the food board is going to have to take a view on what is it that we need to produce in this country to have a resilient food system for the next decade and beyond. And I think making sure that that board functions and delivers outcomes rather than just being a talking shop is going to be absolutely fundamental to delivering a lot of the outcomes that are contained within the review.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Henry, I'm going to come to you. How's this sort of landed at Westminster?
Yeah, I think it's landed well. I mean, reading the report, I thought it was really positive that Minette was sort of setting out the reality that farmers face, and that can really hit Westminster, be used to kind of hit Westminster over the head. I mean, farmers are in a difficult spot. I mean, they always are, right, in the face of a very volatile commodity trading market. You know, they're primary producers. Input costs have gone up a lot, very high at the moment, and they're in a tough spot. And so having Minette come out and sort of crystallise that for government, I think is very positive, and I think creates sort of a line in the sand to move forward on. The inheritance tax issue has obviously drawn out this profitability point, and you know why is it that's sort of the question being asked? Why is it that the profitability or return on capital is so low within the farming sector? And having tangible outcomes from government following that report to try and address this it is a positive thing. I think the challenge that we've had in government is we've been so subsumed by the inheritance tax issue that it's taken oxygen out of the other areas that need to be looked at, whether that's fairness in the food supply chain, looking at different sectors, what they can add in respect of the government's mission on growth, the environmental objectives we're trying to do. So there's a huge range of policy areas that are being worked on within government, and it's just quite nice that A, we've got a sort of a starting point that Minette sort of set that out, and B, that we can work forward and have these sort of tangible outcomes that Tom has just alluded to as well. And I think they'll, you know, as part of the farming roadmap, the 25-year farming roadmap that the government will come out with, we will see a fuller response to all of those. Well, I don't think they're going to take on board all of the 57, but you know, there'll be a more fuller response to the whole report in its total.
Thanks, Henry. The report, of course, was long awaited. There was talk that it was delayed, and I'm going to ask Kelly in a moment for her views on this, but I'd like to have a show of hands as to who in the audience has read at least some or a substantive amount of the report. Thank you.
A very engaged audience. It's very
and who hasn't? Or who is willing to admit that they haven't? So a few. So as Henry Tufnell's just said, a very engaged audience, which is what we would expect at Oxford. Kelly, you're Director of Rural Research at Savills. I'm sure you're among the people that were chomping at the bit to get your teeth into it and have a good read. What's your verdict on it, and what would your priority be for implementing its findings?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sarah, for the question. I think there are just a couple of points that I would like to make. I mean, the first is that we need to look at how these 57 recommendations fit within the short, the medium, and the long term, because none of these are going to be solved overnight. So what does that look like for that short, medium, long-term preparation for the sector? The other is, and you just mentioned there about them tying into the other strategies that we're due to see. And my fear would be that some of these are then watered down and diluted as they get part of other strategies or other plans. So how can we ensure that the recommendations are taken in the context that is required rather than being part of something else or other plans, other strategies? The third part, which I think is really important, is the commitment that's required from stakeholders and policymakers in this space. You know, it's easy to, well, I'd say it's easy. It wasn't obviously easy to write that report and to create those 57 recommendations. But what we don't want is that it's then put on a shelf and that nothing gets done with those 57 recommendations. So there needs to be commitment from stakeholders and policymakers. Just a couple of points within the review that I think are really pertinent. Minette mentions SFI, and I'm sure that might be something that comes up tonight, so I won't go on about that. Trade, you know, I'm sure that might be another question that you have in the audience there for the panel this evening. But the value of food and farming, and I think a really great stat that I've sort of said recently, 6% of UK land is urban. That's an area not much bigger than the size of the northwest of England. 94% is countryside, and of that 94%, 70% is utilised agricultural area. You know, that there is a huge significance there for the rural sector, and that commitment from stakeholders and policymakers is absolutely key.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. One of the report's recommendations was for a closer working relationship between government and the industry. Peter, I know you're not exactly government, but what's your sort of verdict on the report and how it should be implemented, as much as you can say?
reading the report, I mean, there's lots of good bits in there. She was strong on sort of the system framing, so those sort of supply chain fairness, that planning, the skills, the investment and nature finance, and trying to connect that rather than it all be siloed. So that's all to be welcomed. There was something in there around the creation of the Food and Farming Board, which I've only dipped into some of the social media stuff today, but I've seen some negative comments on there. We don't need another board, it will slow things down, but I think it just really bring that accountability to the job. But I do see that this is really focusing on how can we remove friction, so planning, grants, regulation, and really building that sort of longer term investability, so especially around soil and nature, but without undermining food production alongside it. I think when you put your farmer hat on and you say, well, what do farmers want? They want something that they can see and feel, so they want certainty, cash flow certainty, simpler processes, fairer contracts, and I think most of the sector agrees on that sort of problem statement. The test now is the delivery sequencing, so what changes in 2026? And what can farmers really feel with cash flow uncertainty? So that's, you mentioned, Kelly, just about that. How do you make sure it endures as well? This is a great thing, and we're going to see development of the farming roadmap on the back of this and a 25-year plan for farming. But we've got to have something that we all get behind and stick to. So how do we make sure and ensure that endures, and we've got the co-design right so that everybody's bought into a proper direction.
Yeah, and can I just come in there? Because the 25-year plan, the farming roadmap, for many farmers, 25-year horizon is just too far out. And I think we need to shorten the time horizon and say, where do we want to be as a country and as an industry in 10 years' time? What does good look like as an outcome? And how do we deliver that? Because I just fear that the danger with 25 years is that we kick it down the road for too long before we start to get real delivery. And I think we need to really consciously think. If you look at the key statistics in food production, over the last 5 years, poultry production is down, vegetable production is down, cereal production is down, beef production is down. That does not spell out a resilient food system. And when you look at the geopolitical situation around the world at the moment, talk of what's going on in Greenland, what's going on in the Ukraine, what's happened with Venezuela, we've got to think really seriously about how do we deliver a resilient food system for 70 million consumers living on an island. 25 years out is far, far too long, because if we lose the productive capacity, getting it back is going to be incredibly difficult.
Thanks, Tom. Sarah, could I just ask you, you asked the question, what was your verdict on the report? And I know you're not on the panel, but I'll give you the opportunity to give your thoughts.
I'm actually in Tom's camp. It's very dangerous, isn't it? I mean, the new board that's being formed has got amazing opportunity, but how we get the right people onto that board to ensure that it's actually really going to deliver, otherwise we're going to be lost in the rhetoric. We're going to get stuck in lots of words, and we're being stuck into a timescale which is meaningless in terms of actual market resilience. Every farming sector we've got is in trouble. They have falling returns and rising costs, and what you've now got is a very perilous situation around food security, and home-produced food is at risk. I'm not quite sure they get it yet.
Thank you, Sarah. Henry, did you want to...
One of Minette's observations, or one of the things that she wrote about in the report, was the discrepancy often between farms in terms of the farming practices, and you have these wild percentages in terms of the input costs, use of fertiliser, for example, which means that some farms can be inherently much more profitable than others. So having sort of from the left, we like a bit of state control, like a bit of planning, long-term objectives. So and often that can often come into contrast with the sort of entrepreneurial nature of the farming sector, where, and you look at some of the polling and where they're leaning. But I think in the context of what Tom's just set out in respect of the uncertainty with geopolitics, I think a bit of coordination, long-term planning, identifying that we need to try and have a bit more standardisation, a bit looking right across the sector at different, horticulture, dairy, beef, and thinking about how we can make these changes and become more efficient and produce more food, be more secure, and have a more secure nation as a result. So I think there are inherent things within the bedrock, within the values of our party, and I'm making this political, but it is inherently political, and I think that they naturally sit quite well with this, with where we are in terms of the geopolitics of it all, and what farming needs as an industry and as a sector moving forward over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Henry, thank you. Kelly Hewson-Fisher.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on what Tom said and just sort of challenge that in terms of we don't need that sort of, or maybe taking the words out of your mouth, but not to have that 25 years sort of vision. And I think if we look back after the Second World War, farmers and their aim was to produce food. The government was very, very much prescriptive in what the aim was. We had the Common Agricultural Policy to give those direct payments, and pre-Brexit, we then had this agricultural transition. So post-Brexit, all of the devolved nations are going through the agricultural transition in a different format, different timings. So in England, we know that we moved away from those direct support payments to a public money for public goods. And we're all in this sort of sphere at the moment as to, well, what does that actually mean? Does the government actually want us to produce food? What is public money for public goods? And I do feel as though a framework for that 25-year period to give us that direction of where we want to be will enable us to take people on that journey with us. And it's going back to, I know, Louise Manning, you're going to be presenting your report, and I know Lucy Jenner is on stage looking at behaviour change, but how do we look at what that 25-year looks like? I do understand your point of 25 years being too long a timescale for farming businesses, but that doesn't mean to say that we have to have a 25-year plan, that we don't have then 5-year incremental plans within that 25-year period, which we can all work towards. But having a direction of travel so we can really fully understand where we're going, but having those incremental plans to feed into it may be that solution.
Tom, just briefly, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, I mean, I think there's a place for both, but I think it's critical that we have a 10-year time horizon where, even a 5-year time horizon, let's get back to the production of 2020, which has got to be an ambition, because you look at poultry, and particularly something like the Animal Health and Welfare Strategy published before Christmas, it's demanding ever higher standards. And all we're doing at the moment is drawing in poultry produced overseas to standards that we've ruled out sometimes over a decade ago. Battery eggs from the Ukraine, Polish poultry over 38 kilos. And yet we have a desire to push our standards higher. How can we possibly do that? So the trade strategy is critically important. It's got to match the domestic ambition. And we've really got to turbocharge this. Because if there is a global war, you can't say we're going to do it tomorrow. We've really got to have a plan for how we're going to produce the food that a resilient food system needs. Now, imports will always be part of that, and I'm not here advocating that we don't have an import strategy, because imports are going to be crucial, but domestic production is going to be an absolutely critical element of it.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to draw a line under that question. We're going to move on to the next one, but before we do, Emma White, I'm going to throw you in at the deep end, as it were. Henry's already mentioned profitability. We know the issues around profitability within the sector. I'm going to ask Joe Speed, if you'll ask the next question of the panel, and it is coming directly to you, Emma. So.
Thanks, Johan. Good afternoon, panel. Joe Speed, I'm a Nuffield scholar. Should consumers pay more for food? With the context of 20% of the UK unable to afford food, let alone a healthy diet, how do we bridge the gap between health and affordability? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So, Emma, should consumers pay more for food?
I think that's quite a difficult question. The work that I do at Fair Share and the Felix Project, I work very closely with growers and farmers who are passionate about what they do, and as we've mentioned on the panel already, have spiralling and rising costs. I know that the farmers that we speak to are passionate about growing good food, but also passionate that they get that onto people's plates. So again, our role at Fair Share is to get that food that you're passionate about onto people's plates that can't afford to pay that price. So I think it's really difficult to ask a general question to say, can the person that shops at Waitrose, as well as the person who can't afford to buy fruit and veg, be paying more for the goods? I think it's a difficult question. I'd say we need to address, again, in a long-term plan that we've just talked about, how we integrate food redistribution to those who can't afford it into that plan, because again, that's a way of getting that food to people who need it. So I think it would be difficult to raise prices, because cost of living is an old phrase we've heard of long ago, but it isn't going away and it's still impacting so many people. One of the first things to go quite often when people are shopping is out of the basket is fruit and veg, because of affordability, unless it's the prices that have been brought down by the supermarkets themselves, the 5p bags of carrots and so on. But that, it is difficult, because again, people don't have the same nutritional access as perhaps you and I might do when we're doing our weekly shop. The food that we redistribute at Fair Share and at the Felix Project, we now redistribute over 45% produce, and we're redistributing over 50,000 tonnes a year to people who can't pay that price. I wonder if anyone else would like to come in as a response to that.
Emma, thank you. I mean, Tom Bradshaw, it is something that I'm sure NFU members talk about a lot, certainly Farmers Weekly readers do. There's this perception that we undervalue food, that people should pay more for it. If they paid more for it, they would value it more. From the NFU's perspective, should consumers pay more for food?
I think what we need is a fair marketplace, Johan, and then the marketplace will end up dictating what a fair return is. But to have a fair marketplace, you've got to have a level playing field. And I think the bit that really undermines the marketplace at the moment is the fact we don't have a level playing field. And so when we can simply have an out of sight, out of mind attitude, and that's environmental standards, it's welfare standards, it's plant protection products, it's GM technology, it's pesticides. If we continue to have an out of sight, out of mind attitude to food, then we will continue the direction of travel. God, there's the first fine, isn't there? But we will continue to see the direction of travel that we've got at the moment. And that's gone on whether we were in the EU or post-EU. It's probably just getting more exacerbated now that we can do trade deals on our own without without being within the EU fold. So I think making sure we've got a fair marketplace to enable fair returns for the risk that farmers are taking is absolutely essential. And in a developed economy, millions of people going to bed hungry is not acceptable. And that is where we are in this country at the moment, that we have a lot of people going to bed hungry. I don't see that as a food price issue. It's a problem that needs solving via social policy. And we've got to solve it, because it cannot be right on our conscience that these people cannot get the food that they need. But I don't think we I'm convinced we don't solve that by lower food prices. The cost of living crisis is something that we know, and you'll have seen already since Parliament's come back, it's top of the list of the agenda for the current government and for what they're trying to deal with and how they're trying to look at it. The real danger is that they look at it through a very, very short-term lens. And if we look at it through a very short-term lens, the risk is hyperinflation in the long term, because we just continue to produce less and less and less. And then at a time of insecurity or climate change, we cannot produce the food here. So looking at this through a sensible time horizon, rebuilding the capacity of domestic production, getting the planning system functioning, making sure annual investment allowances can be utilised for farm buildings and infrastructure, reservoirs, slurry stores, land drainage, rather than just depreciating assets, are all absolutely fundamental aspects to make sure we can reinvest in the farms and deliver the food security that the country needs.
Thank you, Tom. Henry Tufnell.
Yeah, I mean, in the area that I represent in Mid and South Pembrokeshire, we've got 30% child poverty, and the cost of living is something that it matters enormously to my constituents, and so maintaining an affordable price for food is critical. We've got children going to school hungry, so this is something that's incredibly important. It's why it's so critical that the Prime Minister's recognised that as a sort of real emphasis in this year and when he was addressing Cabinet earlier this week. I think there's this sort of twofold question to it. One is that I think in respect of food pricing itself, I think labelling, I mean, gets quite niche, but labelling is quite important. So there's obviously a price elasticity on various different products, and that obviously each individual consumer might be able to pay a bit more depending on where that is sourced, which is again something that Minette has looked at as well. So if we could have a renewed focus there as well. So I think that is something that is being discussed in Westminster, certainly on the Select Committee that I sit on, the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. But also thinking about it in terms of, from a farmer's perspective, is about that fairness in the supply chain. I mean, Tom's just touched on a lot of different issues, and it is reassuring to know that, what Tom just said, a lot of that we are actioning in respect of planning. We're looking at the groceries code adjudicator, renewing in terms of stepping up action on the supply chain fairness, thinking of, and so there are meaningful, tangible actions that the government is taking in order to try and get a fairer deal for farmers and farming. Look, we're not going to sit here and sell you down the river with uncompetitive trade deals. We're very much wanting to protect the farming industry, protect that community. I appreciate that's been difficult over the past year or so with the inheritance tax issue, but I'm really hopeful that we can move forward, turn over a page, and hopefully get back on track with thinking about these issues, about how we can get a strong food production, how we can make sure that the farming community get a fair price for the food that they're providing to society, and also that the consumers themselves, A, can afford to pay for it, but B, maybe if they want to make the choice where they're prepared to pay a bit more in order to support our British farmers, then they're able to, they can do that. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we should massively increase the provided price of food, but look, I think there are ways in which we can, as a government, act to get a better deal for farming and farmers more widely across the country.
Thank you, Henry. Kelly, do you want to...
Just very, very quickly, I was just going to add, Dominic Watters, if any of you have heard him speak, he's on the stage on Friday, but he talks about accessibility to food. So his story is very much talking about, the local shop to the estate where he lives, only selling ultra-processed foods. So it's not always about the affordability. I appreciate there are situations where it is, but very much about that accessibility to food and food insecurity versus food security.
Thank you. And I'll give you the opportunity as well, Peter, to say...
I mean, is food too cheap? And I do the shopping in our household every week. Food, it feels expensive when I'm at the till. And yet still too cheap in the way that value is shared back to the farm. So, I mean, farmers are price takers, and too often the system is rewarding sort of volume and risk-taking, and that's sort of farmers carrying the risk of weather, volatility, rising costs. So it comes back to what Tom was saying around the fairer supply chains and that better transparency, which is absolutely what Minette's had in her sights. So it's there on the page, it's being addressed. But I think the real need is where we need to get to a stage where the markets are rewarding outcomes rather than risk. So whether that's higher standards, whether that's better soils, whether that's cleaner water, whether that's animal welfare, there's still that waste part to the whole conversation. Smarter procurement, even at home. I hate throwing stuff out of our fridge. I'm the fridge monitor, and it boils my blood to throw food away. Why the hell we're buying lettuces now? Anyway, so I think fair for farmers. So we have to get it fair for farmers, but it doesn't want to become harder for families at the same time. So we have to find a way that we can balance both of those things.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Emma, I'm going to give you the last word on this because it is your sort of specialist area, but just briefly, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. The work that we do across the UK reaches every constituency, it reaches every parliamentary constituency across the UK. And we're very grateful for the work that we've done with the government this year and with DEFRA, with the tackling the surplus from the Farmgate Fund, because that has proven in a short space of time in the past year that by working together, we can increase that accessibility for people. We can increase that accessibility to nutritious, good produce all across the UK. Now, where we go in the future, what our 25-year plan looks like as surplus redistribution, I couldn't tell you. But we do know from what we've done this year, we've increased produce into those communities where people are finding it hard even to afford transport to get to the shop to then access that food. Again, it's connecting people with where that food has come from, with the growers that we have worked with the growers on their doorstep, and perhaps as well part of the picture is reconnecting with people where that food comes from, so they're aware of, you know, how proud we are of growing that in our country, of the farm fields they drive past or walk past on their way to school or work. And I think, again, it's I just ask you all to consider that surplus redistribution has its place in this plan that we're making as a country.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Emma. I'm going to move it on, and Henry mentioned turning over the page on inheritance tax. It would be, I think it's a question that we do have to sort of address in the room. I do not want to give over the whole of the rest of the session over to IHT, though. It is a subject, as has been said, that does tend to suck the oxygen out of the room and overtake everything else. But bearing in mind the pre-Christmas, or at least the partial pre-Christmas climb down, I think that we ought to sort of examine it. And I'm going to ask Jeff Sanson if you would ask your question, please, Jeff. Just wait for the microphone.
Thank you, Johan. As you said, we had the pre-Christmas bonus announcement of intended revisions to the inheritance tax provisions, which came as a sigh of relief to many, albeit let's not underestimate the human impact and angst that those original proposals caused. Many people see that turnaround as a result of the vigorous campaigning which took place, including Blarian tractors outside this hall this time last year. However, as we now enter the slightly more sober period of January and people are reflecting on it, it still is a relief to some, but it's clearly not enough for the wider industry, and I suspect we may hear the rumble of tractors again. So my question is, do we just be grateful for small mercies or turn over the page, or should we reinvigorate the campaigning in the hope of a full capitulation on the issue?
Thanks, Jeff. So in a nutshell, Tom, I'm going to come to you straight away. Should farmers campaign for further concessions on inheritance tax? And I believe you've come out and said that this is as good as it's going to get for the duration of this administration.
I mean, there's several different bits here, but first and foremost, we have to have political will to create change. And there's been 14 months of campaigning in various different guises. The absolute focus of the NFU was on building the support of Labour MPs to understand why this tax was poorly targeted. When we got to the point where maybe nearly 40 MPs abstained on the Resolution 50 vote, it created the political pressure which was necessary to help the government recognise the policy was not right and did not protect the family farm. There is no more political will to create further change at this moment in time. We were absolutely clear with the Prime Minister and with Emma Reynolds that we do not support the proposals as they stand now, and that when the next political opportunity arises to create further change, we will absolutely be looking to secure commitments from all opposition parties to make further amendments to inheritance tax. But I don't feel I could march everybody back up to the top of the hill without any realistic opportunity of creating further change. And now is the time, I believe, to work on the much wider agenda, which is having a huge impact on the profitability of farming. And you know, we've talked about it already. We've got SFI, we've got trade policy, we've got animal health and welfare, we've got TB. You know, there's so much that we need to work on. And we've got to focus on that agenda and try and get meaningful change in those areas when there isn't a political opportunity at this moment in time for further change.
Thanks, Tom. Henry, you're part of the Labour rural group of MPs.
Yeah.
A friendly Labour MP, as it were. Is there more to give, do you think, from the government on inheritance tax, or is it, as Tom says, the deal's there and that's it?
Yeah, no, I think it's as Tom's just set out. Look, I came out quite early on saying that, in terms of the impact it was going to have locally in Pembrokeshire, with lots of Pembrokeshire farmers being affected, going right to the heart of the rural community there. And I think that the concession that the government made before Christmas will have a real dramatic impact and is a huge relief to lots of farmers across the county. And so I'm really pleased that we've got to where we've got to, and we're in a much better place. And yeah, it just shows that constructive dialogue and working within government, we can get to a better place. So I was pleased with what happened. And yeah, I think now's the time to work forward and try and look at these other issues with a greater lens, greater scrutiny. Profitability, in Wales we have a different scheme with the sustainable farming scheme rather than the SFI, but the point remains that we need to focus in on a lot of the other issues that have been affecting the farming community, and too much oxygen has been taken out of those because of this issue. So I'm really pleased that we've got to where we've got to. It's a much better place, and it will have a real dramatic impact on farmers in Pembrokeshire.
Thank you, Henry. Could we do a show of hands? Who thinks that we should, as an industry, who thinks that farmers should campaign for further concessions on inheritance tax? So, some. So, yeah, I don't know, 20 maybe. And who thinks we should move on and as Henry said earlier, try and turn the page on it and look at other things, at least for the time being? So I would say more in the latter than the former camp there. So it looks like you're reading the room pretty well, Tom. I mean, certainly in terms of this room here.
For me, it's not about reading the room. I know there are still farms that are impacted, Johan, but I don't believe we can get further change. And I know that the agenda is so packed that we have got to work constructively with the government. And the NFU is a lobbying organisation to try to mitigate the impacts, to try and create the right legislative framework for the future. We're not a protest organisation. And I believe if we continue publicly fighting this now, we turn ourselves into a protest organisation rather than being a lobbying organisation to try and affect change.
Thank you. I'm going to give Jeff the opportunity to have the last word. Was your family farmer yourself, Jeff?
Are you okay if I mention something as well?
Yeah, and then I'll go to Kelly. And then I really would like, we've got quite a few more questions, so I would like to move it on if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, the amendments are clearly welcome, and I really do applaud, all the effort which has gone into achieving those, and, hats off to you, Tom, for walking what has been an incredible tightrope in terms of trying to keep everyone on board. There's just one statistic which sits in my head. I might not remember it totally, but something like 76% of agricultural output comes from 24% of the farms. So the impact assessment of that on those large farms and those large businesses, I have yet to see.
Thank you. And Kelly, just briefly.
Yeah, so my colleague every year produces a spotlight such as this on the GB farmland market. Last year, Andrew Teamy, he did some modelling of the impact on farm businesses, and he's just remodelled some of that data to look at the impact. The publication will be out the first week in February, but just some little snippets to come out. An arable 800-acre farming business will still require 70% of post-tax profit over a 10-year period to fund the inheritance tax at a 1% rate of capital employed. So looking at those larger businesses are still going to be impacted. Yes, the smaller family farming businesses that we were talking about will be supported, but there will still be some that are impacted going forward.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
At Savills, we understand firsthand what the rural sector is going through during this period of seismic change.
Whether you're managing a multi-generational change, wanting valuations for your property and assets, or needing some practical guidance on land use and balancing farming with the developing opportunities, Savills is here to help. Additionally, our research team provides a wide range of useful and freely available information which you can access by visiting the Savills Rural Knowledge Portal.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Another question. Will Evans.
We have a very well documented labour crisis in farming. Not Labour government, Labour as in workforce, Henry. Despite all the current challenges, I'd argue there are more opportunities for exciting and well-paid careers in the industry for young people and new entrants than there have been for a very long time. Yet, if you look at farming social media and, dare I say, some aspects of traditional ag media too, very conscious that I'm in a room sitting next to the editor of Farmers Weekly, you'd think that the industry is on its knees and everyone's on the brink of ruin. Do we need to be careful that we're not putting young people off entering the industry and exasperating the labour crisis?
I'm going to go to Peter on this. Peter Craven. I mean, what Will's saying is, do we moan too much, and are we so?
It's nice to come to me as the voice of the young, isn't it? Okay. Thank you for that, Johan. I think just following back to the conversation we just had around inheritance tax, we're missing a whole conversation here, which is around that sort of kitchen table conversation around succession, and some of those really hard. The hard chat that has been forced as a result of this inheritance tax whole chat. It's forced families to have those hard conversations that they haven't been able to even consider or have before. So yes, the threshold change is a real relief, but families need to prepare for that, and I think there's a lot. There's a lot needed, Will, in that, to go in that direction, to deal with some of that. So I did an upfield study, is probably where you're alluding to, but it was around looking at how do you go from good to great, but what's the formula for family success? And there are things that people are using. But it effectively brings families together with shared values for a start. What are our shared values on this farm? What are we standing for? Why are we doing any of this? And then sort of creating clarity around roles and responsibilities, accountability, how we make decisions, just some of the simple stuff that causes the friction and the problems and often drives to silence. And you're absolutely bang on. There are so many opportunities out there. But if you can't make decisions together, you can't have any of those opportunities. They're not for you. So you have to be able to have that conversation. You have to be able to align your family. So we talk about a government thing here of the government are going to solve everything with a 25-year roadmap. We need a family roadmap. Families need to look at themselves and say, where are we going for the next 25 years? What's our roadmap? What do we want? What are we going to do in 5-10 years' time? What's the future look like for us? And you talk about vision, but you can't lead anybody anywhere if you don't know where you're going. So let's work out where we're going. And that, I think, will bring that positivity back, bring that hope back, bring that opportunity to the table that isn't there if you can't make decisions together. So it's a really important conversation. And I think it's great that the inheritance tax, that's been a sort of a throw-off, spin-off of that whole conversation. And of course, it's caused a lot of friction because we don't like talking about any of that stuff. It's difficult.
Thank you, Peter. Emma White, how is farming perceived among the non-farming public? I mean, a lot of your work will be done with non-farmers and non-food producers and urban communities. What sort of is it as Will says that we're looked at as being a bunch of moaning people? And are we putting people off coming into the industry because of the way that we portray it?
I've done quite a lot of work this year with Harper Adams, with some of their students, talking to them about sort of the future, and partly with the agenda of introducing surplus redistribution, talking about the whole supply chain. However, I've encountered in those conversations and with some of the younger people coming into the industry that I've met, a real passion for food and doing something to change food security. So I think there is a drive out there. I think there is a drive from people. I think there probably could be more done in the education sector to raise the profile of it amongst young people. I speak on behalf of my husband, is a teacher in a school, and I guess thinking of his experience, he would say probably it's not necessarily a career he guides people into. However, he guides people into any number of careers. So I think there is a real opportunity there from people that I've spoken to, and I do speak to younger people coming in through our growers and suppliers. Again, we do a lot of work with young people in our warehouses, in our projects and in our charities, and the hope is as well that we can upskill some of those people to go into the food industry in some way, into our food suppliers, and to work with our growers and farmers too. So there's that hope that we also can play a part in helping that go full circle and provide that impetus to help people be part of change to food security. I hope that answers some of your
Thanks,
questions.
Emma. Tom Bradshaw, I was at an Agri-Future Forum event in the autumn in London, organised, or at least part organised by the NFU Education, bringing urban youngsters into, I think it was it was the Mothers Union Hall in Westminster, showing them opportunities around food and farming, and they were really, really interested in it.
I think the answer to Will's question is yes. There's a doom loop that's circulating that we've got to break. And because if we don't, there is a real danger that the people that want to work in the industry for the future don't see the opportunity that there is within the farming industry. Profit's a dirty word. Yeah, if I'd been here at the end of August last year, I would have said to all of you, the only sector that was having a really difficult time at that point was the cereal sector. I know milk has fallen off a cliff since then, but poultry, either meat or eggs, was pretty good. The red meat sector was where it needed to be, and dairy had a reasonable time of things. Now, I know the IHT picture had dominated and had created this, the sort of cloud hanging over the industry, but when we're making money, we should celebrate that, because people are only going to come into farming if they can make a living out of it and make a career out of it. And we've got to look at innovative ways, whether it be share farming, whether it's profit shares. We're going to have to be more flexible about our working structures and having more flexible hours, because we will look back in 10 years' time, I'm sure, and think people working 80 hours a week, it's not normal. But we've got to be able to pay them properly, and that's where the whole supply chain has a critical role to play, because a lot of it has been subsidised by family labour for far, far too long. And we cannot continue being in that point where family labour is subsidising the cost of production. And that is a position that we've been in for far too long. So getting real returns, real wages, flexible working patterns, and I know this all sounds really easy sitting here, but unless we adapt, we will find it really difficult. And I know farms on the edge of relatively large conurbations that are incredibly flexible. You look at what Abby Reader does. She's incredibly flexible with how they work and the working structure within their farm to make sure that they've got enough people that want to come and work there. And I think we've got to think about how we can do that for the future.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else on the panel like to say anything?
I feel like we should give you a membership form. Good pay, good working conditions, proper structure within the farming industry. It sounds like we're going to start. Maybe we got you.
Careful, Henry. Careful. You'll see my true political colours.
Thank you. Henry, thank you.
I was just going to say, for me, I think most people in this room will have a social media presence, and I think we all have a responsibility to talk about what we do, the roles that we play within our sector. I'm hugely optimistic, passionate. I think it's an amazing sector to be part of and to look towards the future. But I didn't know that my role existed 2 years ago at all, and I don't know how many people in the room knew that Savills had a rural research team that we cover the UK. So I think we all have a responsibility to promote the roles across the sector and to support people wanting to come through.
Thank you. Thanks, Kay. Another question Bit of a techie one, but an important one nonetheless. Adam Short, please.
Adam Short, AHDB. This should really get us off the IHT topic, I think. So we know that demands on farmers for sharing farming activity data is constantly growing. It feels like people have been saying that for about 10 years now. But trust is still cited as a major barrier. What do the panel think the solution is?
Thank you, Adam. So farm data, farmers are expected more and more to share their data with others anonymously, but there is an issue around trust and how that is done. People can, of course, benefit from data, including the farmers that are sharing it. But how do we overcome that barrier? How do we ensure that it is secure? Kelly, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on the sharing of farm data and how can we harness the benefits whilst minimising any of the challenges around it.
I feel like I'm cheating a little bit, Adam, because you and I spoke earlier about this, to be honest. And AHDB are actually running a breakfast session. Is it Friday morning, Adam? Friday morning about data. So if anybody wants to learn more, please head to that session. But the conversation that you and I had earlier was very much about everybody being part of the conversation and being at the table. You know, everybody wanting the data for potentially different reasons. But ultimately, there is a value to that data. And so understanding that value. But what we also spoke about that I thought was really interesting was ownership versus control of that data. And so who owns that data and who controls that data? Who has liability? Who takes responsibility? And you and I sort of came to the conclusion it's very much still in its an emergent stage, but as farmers and the farming industry, we must be at the table to be part of the conversations before decisions are made about our data without us being part of that.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Tom, views on farm data?
Well, like Kelly, Tom and I were actually talking about farm data, Tom Allen Stevens and I, before we sat down on the panel, and the soil shot that's mentioned within Manette's review and about how we bring together data around that area. I mean, I really like the principle of the data custodian that is being developed within AHDB. The question I've got is, can we move quick enough for the supply chain? And the supply chain are becoming ever more vocal about what they need. And can, as an industry, in a uniform way, move quickly enough to sort of satisfy the demands of the various different parts of the industry that all want more data? And I think that's a really, really genuine question. But having a trusted middle person to hold the data so that everybody understands who has access to it, and you tick a box yes or no when you've got a contract with whoever it is that's buying your grain or buying your beef. Do you have access to my data or don't you have access to my data? It gives the farmer absolute control of how they can share that data, and I think the principle of it is absolutely right. It is just then knowing we need a baseline of what is acceptable accuracy in the data. And there could be 20 different people in this room that can all meet that threshold in terms of suppliers that are monitoring the data, and you can choose as a farmer which ones you use, which you don't use, and you can supply and upload it into your data custodian, which then makes it available anonymized to the supply chain. The amalgamation of that data is actually, that's where there's real value for the industry as well. Individual bits of data sitting on my software at home aren't really that helpful. Once we get to a bigger picture, it's when data starts to have a much better concept. But I really understand, and I'm one of these that's really reluctant to just give my data away willy-nilly without understanding how and who is going to be using it.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Anybody else on the panel? Henry? No?
I just think that increasingly farmers are becoming sort of data scientists. The range of technologies that they're having to use, the information that they're getting in, it's changing the nature of the industry. And government is trying to sort of help facilitate that. We've got various, I think the Secretary of State announced £20 million for the, bear with me, Accelerating Development of Practices and Technologies Fund. So, a lot of these funds have, long names, but the impetus behind it is to try and provide that that sort of baseline for farmers to come in and learn those technologies and adapt and move forward and better their practices, better their own farming situation. And so I think technology is incredibly important, and obviously there will always be issues with how different companies use your data, and it's important that we have strong regulation around that to make sure it's done correctly and in the proper manner. But fundamentally, the data and the way it is used is going to play an increasingly large role within the sector, and it's something that I think the industry, when we're talking about profitability, is going to have to embrace.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry. And Peter Craven.
Yeah, I mean, the best data is the data that you already generate. So, and it's how you use it then. So yields, input rates, livestock performance, soil test, rainfall. I know for me, pulling that data together and then sort of saying what's making me money, what's losing me money, what's putting me at risk here. I mean, that's what data should be used for. There's a question that runs alongside this whole thing, which is, am I doing the right thing as well? So we were supplying supermarkets with potatoes. You sign up to something called SEDEX, and all of our data is then transparent to the processor, to the supermarket. That's great, as long as you're doing the right things. It then becomes, I had a conversation earlier today, you can get a Horsch sprayer. It'll record wind speed. I wouldn't want that. Why wouldn't you want that? Well, it will record wind speed that I don't want it recording. So suddenly, you've got data being recorded that you don't want. Why don't you want it? Because you're not doing the right thing. So we've got this regulatory baseline. And so there's another sort of conversation to be had alongside all of this is, why don't you want the data to be shared? Because in the good old days of my father, my grandfather, the accountant said to him once, where's these 7 cows you've got? There wasn't 7 cows, they were at the butcher's dead, but we didn't have any cows. But as times change, you have to start telling the truth. And so...
Shall I stop him now?
He's dead. I don't think they can come get us. But we've got a regulatory baseline. I feel we do have to raise that regulatory baseline. I think it is too low. And so how do we start doing the right thing and then recording accordingly? But I want to use data to show me where the risk is, to make sure that I'm making a profit, to reduce the problems and to drive efficiency. So that's what we should be doing. And it's driving this sort of new way of farming with our heads, not our hearts, so that we know what we're doing. We're going into it with our eyes open.
Thanks, Peter. So no hiding place from data, and it's keeping us honest, even when perhaps we want to be a little less honest than we should be. Thank you very much. Look, the final question, we always try and end these Farmers Weekly question time sessions on a positive note, and this is the opportunity for the panel in their answers to be a little bit more positive. Our final question, Chris Riddle, please.
Chris Riddle, Chairman of the Farmers Club. If, panel, you could grant one wish for farming in 2026, what would it be?
Thanks, Chris. If you could grant one wish for farming in 2026, what will it be? I don't always ask each question to each panellist, but because it's the last question, I'm going to ask everybody on the panel for their thoughts on this. Tom, your wish for farming in 2026, if you could grant it, what would it be?
I could say rain at night, sun during the day, temperatures at 20 degrees and the perfect growing season, grass growth, good milk. I think for me, we've got to make progress on the trade agenda. That is the one that long term sets the future of this industry. And we cannot continue to open our markets to produce that we could not produce here as farmers. The decision then is, particularly, as I say, with the animal health and welfare strategy that's been published, if we're going to produce to those standards, we cannot be expected to continue opening ourselves up to competition that does not meet those standards. And trade policy will dictate the future of domestic food production in this country. We should also have a very real expectation that where the standards are being set by the government, all public procurement should meet those same standards that are expected of domestic production. At the moment, it does not do that, and it is not acceptable. And I think that trade agenda is the one that sets our future agenda. And it could be really exciting because we know there's demand for our product around the world, but it can also be very threatening. So it's a double-edged sword, and that for me is the really critical agenda that sets the marketplace for the long term.
Tom Bradshaw, thank you. Kelly Houston-Fisher.
Yeah, and I think from the conversations that we've had just today as well, I'd really like to see the strategic and operational planning that we're promised to really come to fruition. I think that with communication and collaboration, that will drive some of the confidence that we need to take us forward. So that would be my wish.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Kelly. Peter Craven.
I'm just going to go to the theme of this conference, which is resilience, or growing resilience. So I'm going to slightly change my response. So one wish. So for farming industry as a general, one change that protects margin. So what could you make as one change which protects margin? One change that protects soils or the land in some way, and one change that protects the family. So there's your one change, but 3 times. So margin, land, and soil, and family. So what one change you can make?
Probably 3 wishes, but Henry Tufnell.
So I would like a reset of the relationship between the farming industry and the government. It's a big wish. It's a big wish. Yeah.
Aim big, right?
Yeah, go big. I just think that there's so much at stake here in respect of so many of the issues we've touched upon today. We can only do it if we work in collaboration with one another. And I appreciate that requires a rebuilding of trust. But I hope that we can get there, basically. Yeah.
Henry, thank you. And last but by no means least, Emma White, your wish for farming.
Absolutely. My wish would be that the farming industry continue to see the undeniable benefits of giving any surplus food that might be ploughed back in, that might not meet spec, to food charities for redistribution. We've worked and campaigned for years for the project, for the Farmgate Fund project we've done with DEFRA this past year. And that has led to many more people having food on their plates, many more people receiving your food, but also receiving the hope that food brings. So we hope that you will consider the importance of surplus redistribution and getting that food you're passionate about onto people's plates.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Emma. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this special Farmers Weekly Question Time event here at the 2026 Oxford Farming Conference. I think we've had a really healthy discussion. As always, we could always carry on for longer, but unfortunately time is against us. That's had some real food for thought, I think, from farmers, food producers, and right through to consumers, and some great answers too from our panellists. So from NFU President Tom Bradshaw, Emma White from Fair Share and the Felix Project, Labour MP Henry Tufnell, Kelly Houston-Fisher from Savills, and Peter Craven from Natural England. I'd like to thank you all very much. Please, everybody, give them a round of applause. And that's it for this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, the Farmers Weekly Question Time event in association with Savills, recorded at the 2026 Oxford Farming Conference. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do leave us a 5-star review. Remember, you can catch up with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture every Friday on our regular Farmers Weekly podcasts.